Good morning. This is episode 4 of Chewing the Gristle, a poetry chat with Black and Tim Conroy. Our guest today is the poet and writer Cassie Premo Steele. Cassie Premo Steele is originally from Detroit, Michigan. She's been a Pushcart-Prize nominated poet. She's a novelist and author. She is a contributor to Huffington Post and Medium. She wrote a column for 6 years for Literary Mama, Birthing the Mother Writer. Her writing focuses on themes of intersectionality, ecofeminism, and collective trauma. She is a writing coach. She is living in Columbia, South Carolina, and she is my friend, and Tim's as well. Welcome, Cassie.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with both of you.
The first question is going to be, tell us about your poetry journey, your education, and who your favorite poets and your mentors and teachers were.
Okay, great. I really believe that I was born a poet. I would keep journals from a very young age, and I would number them. So in case biographers lost one, they would know they had to keep looking. One of my first poems was 2 lines. Why did God create Easter? He thought it was a bunny day. So I was raised in a Catholic family by a mom who had a PhD and was a philosophy professor, and I turned to my journal daily, growing up, all through high school. I knew that I wanted to be a writer. At one point, I flirted a bit with the idea of being a doctor, but getting a D in college chemistry ended that. But I think I wanted to do that because I was also interested in healing. I knew that there was a way for writing to be a way of healing. So I went on to get my PhD in Comparative Literature and Women's and Gender and Sexuality Studies at Emory, which was a wonderful place to study because I was able to take classes from any department that I wanted, not just literature, not just English. So it was very international education, very intersectional. The 2 mentors that I had there who were most important to me long term were Kathy Caruth, who is a scholar of trauma, and Beverly Guy-Sheftall, who was the founder and still is the founder and director of the Women's Research Center at Spelman College. And she came over across town to teach a graduate class in feminist theories, Black feminist theories. And it completely upended the white narrative of feminism in the United States and across the world. She argued that Black women were the first feminists in the United States because they had a consciousness of freedom. And then later, I would come to understand that actually Native women, before it was the United States, had a completely different understanding of gender and work and politics and family. So I would consider them the first feminists on the continent. And then fast forward, I balanced, if you can balance a million things at once, teaching at the university level, writing, publishing, wifing, mothering, and as the years went on, became more and more focused on myself, my own voice, what I wanted to do. And in 2008, I switched permanently from academe to the writing coaching with women from around the world. which is a way that I can still bring to bear all my scholarship and years of teaching, but also help women academics who need this kind of support that the institution doesn't give. So the primary thing has always been to be a poet and a writer, but everything else that I've done, I think, has been training and research and practice for making the writing deeper and better.
And Cassie, did you have much formal poetry education training?
No. In fact, I purposefully didn't because I found very early on that I think I had one undergraduate class in fiction writing at University of Virginia, and I was horrified that we were spending 95% of our time criticizing each other's work. I knew intuitively that that's not the way to write in a deep way. It switches your brain to that critical mode. You suddenly are seeing, problems everywhere in other people's work and your own. And I wasn't interested in that. The work that I was doing in analyzing literature and culture and language, that was enough analytical work. For me, creative writing has that critical mind in the revision process, definitely in the publication process, in the reading, rereading. But in terms of creation, I wanted it to be pure and untouched from what I consider to be a very male Western linear way of looking at words.
Can I ask you about your writing process? And
Sure.
Dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I love process. So what I have devised over the years that I practice myself and I also coach others to do is to have a handwritten practice on a daily basis, and if life circumstances don't allow a daily basis, then 2 days a week or 3 days a week or 5 days a week. I myself often don't journal on the weekends because that's family time, that's sacred time. But I wake up in the morning, I either meditate or do some listening to music in a mindful way, and then I just pour things out onto the page. Not for a very long time. It's probably, and I've worked with this over the years with clients, the brain works best in 20-minute bursts. So the writing really often maxes out at 20 minutes at that point. And then I shut the journal, which is very important. If you go back and reread that draft of the poem or the letter that you wrote to your 7-year-old self, or the scree to, someone that you're angry with, then, as I was saying before, your mind flips into that critical mode. You're going to start to cross out. You're going to start to doubt yourself. Shut the journal. And I literally shut the journal, blow out my candle. I have it here. I have a little, altar for my writing. And then I transition into my day. Now, if I'm working on a longer project, let's say a longer essay or a novel or a book, then after that original morning time, I will return to the page, and at that point, usually work on the computer. And when I do that, it's also in a very focused way in terms of I know what my word count target is. I know what I'm working on that day. On this side, I have my altar. On this side, I have an asterisk calendar where I put an asterisk on a little whiteboard for whatever my goal was, particularly for that day in that writing project that I'm working on. And I do not move on to the rest of my day until those two things are done. And honestly, that could be at 6 a.m. It could be at 8. It could be at 10. It depends on, when I have a client. But that comes first, and then I take weekends off.
What do you tell the emerging writer
Mm-hmm.
who's trying to work through the stages of mediocrity that you have to sort of work through to get better, and that frustration that happens? I love the idea about closing the journal, walking away.
Yes.
Can you kind of talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to turn it back to Al.
Sure. I think we're writing for the people that we're becoming. So that's why criticizing, editing, even sharing, Al, on Facebook, at that point is too soon. You are literally handing over the just needed dough that needs time to rise. And as you give the writing time to rise, it could be a week, it could be a month. My book, The Pomegranate Papers, those poems were so intimate about marriage and mothering that I never thought I would share any of that. And 20 years went by and I thought, these are poems. These are not about me anymore. They're not autobiography. There's a magic that sort of happens when we release something out into the world. You could call it the mindfulness principle of letting go, but it really is moving from ego to service. At first, when we're writing in our journal, it is about us. It is about that pain, that doubt, that anger, the terror. Get all that out. But when you get it out, then you can return later and you can see it not as something about you or something for your career or something that'll make you famous or rich or respected, but really an act of service to share with the world. Here's what I made at one point in my life, and may it be helpful to you.
That is wonderfully expressed. Brother Al.
Yeah. Well, right now, we would like you to maybe share a few poems.
Okay.
And then we'll have some more questions.
Okay, wonderful. Let me start with the first poem from my very first book, which is called Ruin. And I don't know if you can see this, but my daughter and I are wearing matching Hannah Anderson dresses on the back. So that's how long ago this was. And the first poem is the title poem for the book, Ruin. And if life were a vertical journey, I would spend my whole life going down, past the stars and their long memory, past the air and its caress of love, past the trees and their painful branches, past the swollen belly of the ground, past the water where we all come from, further and further until hitting the hot core of the center, what some call truth and I call feeling, the same thing. The moment when there is nowhere else to go and you are alone, and the hard seed of who you are presses itself into your palm and begs you to eat it. And its taste reminds you of why you are still, after all this falling, alive.
That's wonderful.
The fallings and the failures are part of the beauty. It took me a long time to come to see that, having grown up Catholic and buying into the dialectic and sin and guilt and the resurrection. But I believe here on earth, embracing the falling is how we are saved, if you want to use that language, or maybe how we learn to embrace ourselves and each other. So the next poem that I'll do is from This Is How Honey Runs. which was my first book with Anne-Marie Lockhart, the publisher at Unbound Content. And this one is called Better. I wrote each of these poems literally with clients, in that when I give a writing prompt in my sessions with clients, I also write. And I do not ask them to share. We create a safe, sacred space and we write together. But it's not for show and tell or criticism. So this is called Better. And I know in my head who I was sitting with when I wrote this, but nobody needs to know. You tell me you wrote poems in your crazy years, and since getting better, they are gone. You associate them with vices, smoking up all night, so many words, everything too much, each moment too long. You are done with all that, you say. I nod and turn you around. Look back, I say. See the seeds you dropped on the ground. They are blooming into flowers now. Go back. Feel the tug on each stem as you pull them. This is the force of being unattached. You are like that. You are your past. Nothing you did was a waste. Look now. You are also a blooming face.
Why don't you do one more? I enjoy hearing you read.
Okay. So this is Beautiful Waters, which is a small chapbook based on poetry that I wrote after my honeymoon with my wife. Here's one that's shorter, and I think that'll work better for you can see that they weave in a lot of Native American history and history of Western expansion, and of course our own honeymoon and love. This is section 9 from Rainbows. Approaching a double-trunked tree cut down to reveal its remaining two-ness up to our knees, I stop, knowing this will be the vision I have been searching for in this state of beautiful waters and rainbows. I bend down to the forest floor, and from above comes a straight rainbow, its light indistinguishable from the trees it rides in on. First blue sky like light before sunrise, then lavender like at our wedding, deep blue like afternoon, then green like all we have seen, yellow like sun, blue again, and pink, then tart like lemon and salmon in the blue of streams. It touches down on another rainbow, coming in horizontal and thick, its spectrum a layering of wedding cake in the traditional piling our bodies make right across that tree, and the light catches between the twin trunks cut horizontally and now home to ants and moss, and I see the curve between them holds light like the cup of a belly, a soft place calling to rainbows to cross and be what color allows them to be.
Those were gorgeous, Cassie.
Thank you.
And I'm trying to remember, were you in Oregon or Washington?
Yeah, that was Oregon. Yeah, we stayed in Oregon. We were there for 2 weeks. And we had a tiny little car that we rented. I did a bit of a book tour, because you have to multitask as a writer. Earth Joy Writing is my book for writers. It's subtitled Creating Harmony Through Journaling and Nature. And the publisher is Ashland Creek Press, which is out there in Ashland, Oregon. And so I did a tiny book tour as part of our honeymoon, and we just drove thousands of miles, and the radio didn't work on the car, and so we were quiet the entire time, and it was just an amazing experience.
Okay. We're going to shift gears a little bit, but I know that you like Anne Sexton and you've read Anne Sexton. And that's one of the things we share. Who else did you read, and who are you reading now that inspire you?
Okay. In addition to Anne Sexton, Gloria Anzaldúa was very important to me. Borderlands La Frontera was a mix of poetry and essay that really broke open gender and genre and our ideas of the borderlands in the Americas, but also in terms of time and Western civilization versus indigenous civilization. So that's one. Another very influential writer early on was Mary Lou Awiakta, who's an Eastern Cherokee writer. Her book, Selu, S-E-L-U, is also a mix of poetry and essay. And Alice Walker called it a seed book. And I agree with that. You can return to that book over and over and over. Joy Harjo has also been incredibly influential to me. Her poetry, of course, but more so her music. I bought her first album in the Native American Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque when I took a trip out west by myself very, very early, 96, I think it was, or yeah, I think, or 8, I don't know. But I listened to that album on that trip out west, and I really had visions of who I wanted to be. And it was a quest for me with that music to come back to Colombia and create that person that I saw, particularly in New Mexico. And then finally, Audrey Lorde has been incredibly influential to me. And I'm reading her now, and that's part of the project that I'm working on a daily basis. She said things that we still can't hear, but we're hearing more and more than we did when she was writing in the 80s. And I still think of her as a prophet and as a community leader, even though she's passed away. I believe that her spirit and her words are still here.
Cassie, I'm gonna go back to sort of questions kind of geared to the emerging writer.
Okay, good.
And you know, it seems like a common theme for a young writer, an emerging writer of any age, to use strong emotions first in their writing, their poetry. It's something that's really they felt strongly about, whether it's grief or love. And so, you know, in your poetry, you use your experiences so much and so well, and your beliefs and your faith and your interests all permeate your poetry. So how would you guide the young emerging writer to harvest that in a way that's helpful?
I believe that feeling is the key to healing. Toni Morrison writes about this in Beloved. And so when we sit down, particularly in those young years or during a crisis or during a life transition, and we're just so full of emotion, it could be 5 different emotions at once, we can find ways to allow that to move through us by realizing that physiologically those big waves of emotion last for 90 seconds in our minds, bodies, and spirits. So we can get ourselves into a place to really feel it Really go there. Let it wash through you. And maybe you're writing while you do it. But when it recurs, when it becomes something that feels like a problem, whether it's anxiety or depression or an anger that keeps going on, we can learn that that is a story that we keep repeating to ourselves. And we can, through training in mindfulness or therapy or good discussions with friends, find ourselves catching those repeated stories and realizing, oh, there may be more emotion that needs to be faced and embraced here and then written about so that I can let those stories go. And I'm not saying that it's easy. When I said I write for, journaling 20 minutes in the morning, that's 20 minutes in the morning, but this is 40 years of facing the emotions and healing and asking for help and getting help on a regular basis to let go of the past and the trauma.
I can't help but think you were the perfect person to answer that question. That's really important.
Thank you.
As we look at that aspect of writing, there's also a craft aspect. Things like the use of metaphor and rhyme and alliteration. Does that flow naturally for you, or do you have to go back and look at it and find it and hone it? How do you work on your craft as a writer?
I'm a very visual person, but for me, poetry is a sound experience rather than a visual experience. So it does come fairly naturally once I move myself into that place to listen. And so I hear a rhythm first, and often the rhythm is not connected to language. The process of putting the words on paper is a process of translating the rhythm that I'm hearing into language on the page in a way so that it conveys that feeling. I edit in terms of, as I said before, letting time go by and then returning when it's really not about me anymore. And then I type it up. I look at form in terms of line break, stanzas, all of that at that point. But 10 years may have gone by since the time that I wrote the poem at that point. And I also am often preparing the poem for a particular audience. Let's say there's someone wants me to share a poem with military wives whose husbands are deployed. I'm going to shape that poem that I wrote for them in a particular way so that they can hear it. So that's two separate processes. One is letting the music end up on the page, and two is preparing it for the audience. I recently read Audrey Lorde in Sister Outsider, and I could find it in my journal, but she basically said something like she learned over the course of her lifetime not to tinker too much with poems. That when she was younger, she would spend 4 hours on, should this word be here? Should it be there? Should I cut the word altogether? And as she got older, she realized the most important thing is, did I convey the feeling? Does it do for the reader and for me as the reader when I look back on it, that message, that song, that rhythm, that feeling, that opening into beauty? If it does, it's done. Leave it alone.
I've definitely been, a person that sort of ruined the initial spark by overreaching, before. I relate to that comment, and I kind of appreciate that from her voice especially. But really, you kind of alluded to this, the project you're working on now. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now?
Actually, no. Because when I am in a sacred space like this, I don't talk about the writing. I learned that from Louise DeSalvo, who was a mentor to me. She wrote the book Writing as a Way of Healing. She also was the biographer for Virginia Woolf, who uncovered the evidence and the experience of child sexual abuse in Virginia Woolf's life. And Louise DeSalvo said to me, one, you never tell your title of a book. And two, if you are talking about a project that you're working on, you're literally dispersing that energy through your mouth and it will not come out the hand anymore. So I could talk about something else.
No, that's a really good answer to that question, because I think a lot of people would agree with that. You know, that is something that, you know.
Yeah, it's like a marriage. It's a marriage that I'm in and I don't play around. I'm faithful to that.
Well, Cassie, can you read as our time is winding down, can you read a couple more poems and then Al will do some concluding remarks.
Okay, good. This is called This Is Not a Resurrection, and it comes from Tongues and Trees, which was my collected poems that had been published other places, and then some new poems. This came out in 2017, and the poems are from 1994 to 2017. I wrote this after the election of Donald Trump. This is not a resurrection. This is not a resurrection. We wanted it to be. We pulled back the cave stone of who we were, what they did. We called them on it. We went to search for who we now could be. This is not a resurrection. It was the women who did this. Women who wept, washed feet, and covered the face, and dark bodies that carried the cross like water and wood, without enough break or wine, holding most of the weight, time after time. This was not a resurrection. There was no gathering and showing of the palms. No one could agree upon the meaning of safety or how to pin proper blame. So while we waited for tongues to stop wagging and holy breath to arrive, we admit this is not a resurrection. And we return to take the leaves left lying since last week, and their colored bodies begin to pile like flowers at a funeral that smell too sweet, and do their time standing in for those who are still living but could not be present as a family in this fire, and the sympathy bouquets wait patiently for their turn in the pyre to rise. Lenny wanted to say something.
Lenny knows good poetry.
Yeah, he's my buddy. He's a really good meditator. His name's Lenny Bruce.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah, he's kicked his heroin habit with poetry and meditation. Okay. And this is also from the same book. It's called Quiver. Yesterday, my wife played with my mother's dog. throwing the tennis ball from the kitchen to the family room again and again, making her happy. And animals have fewer words and more love than humans, until she said, "Something is wrong with the dog." Her jaw was quivering, and I said, "Maybe she's had too much." And my mom said, "No, she just does that." And so my wife knelt down, put the ball down, petted her, and kept her distance, because dogs don't always like to be hugged. It takes their power away. And she whispered, "It's okay. It's okay. You can take a break. You don't have to keep going and going until you quiver."
Wonderful.
And he's relaxed now. He liked that one.
Mm. That was just wonderful. We
Thank you.
want to thank you for being such a wonderful interview. There's so many more questions we want to ask and so much more we want to hear, but we have to end somewhere. And with that poem, Quiver from Tongues and Trees, it's a wonderful place to end.
Thank you.
Thank you for today, and thank you for things in the past and things you'll do in the future.
Oh, thank you, Al. It's wonderful. Thank you, Tim, for your beautiful questions, and I hope this is of service to those who listen.